had never felt so alone among so many people. The great hall loomed around me, cold not just in temperature, but in intent, as if every stone remembered the disappointment of forced vows and loveless unions. Candlelight trembled along the walls, yet nothing felt warm. The shadows stretched long across the floor, like dark hands reaching for me. I stood at the center of it all, silent, still, while rows of nobles watched with unreadable faces and unreadier hearts. No smiles, no whispers of blessing, only judgment, and the quiet certainty that no one in this room wished for this wedding to happen. Least of all, the man I was meant to marry. I had known this day would come, though I had not allowed myself to picture it. My family's disgrace had left me with little choice. My father's debts, my mother's silence, the whispers that followed me through corridors, all had led me here, to this union that was less a promise than a punishment. I was to be bound to Prince Damien Aldrich, heir to a throne that had no need of me, a man whose name carried weight and whose presence filled the hall even in silence. He stood beside me, tall and rigid, his shoulders squared as though carved from the same stone that surrounded us. His face betrayed nothing, no kindness, no cruelty, only distance. His eyes did not meet mine, though I felt the heat of his nearness, the faint brush of his sleeve against my arm. I wondered if he resented the contact, if he wished the space between us were wider. The officiant's voice echoed, solemn and heavy, reciting words that had been spoken in countless ceremonies before ours. Yet here they felt hollow. Each vow was an obligation, each phrase a chain. When my turn came, my lips moved, but the words felt foreign, as though I were reciting lines in a play I had not chosen to join. My voice was steady, polite to a fault, but inside I was numb. Damien's voice followed mine, deep and measured, carrying through the hall with the authority expected of him. He spoke as though the vows were decrees, not promises. His tone did not falter, but it lacked warmth. It was duty, nothing more. The nobles watched with eyes that judged rather than blessed. I could feel their disdain, their whispers unspoken but loud in the silence. To them, I was the daughter of a disgraced house, a blemish upon the royal line. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. I kept my gaze lowered, fixed on the stone beneath my feet, afraid that if I met their eyes, I would see my own shame reflected back. When the final words were spoken, when the binding was declared, there was no applause, no cheer, only silence. The officiant's voice faded, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. Damien turned slightly, offering his arm as tradition demanded. I placed my hand upon it, light as a feather, unwilling to impose more weight than necessary. He did not look at me. We walked together down the length of the hall, our footsteps echoing against the stone. The nobles rose as we passed, their movements precise, their faces unreadable. I felt small, diminished, as though the grandeur of the palace swallowed me whole. My gown brushed against the floor, the fabric heavy, the embroidery a reminder of the wealth I did not deserve. The doors opened and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of the courtyard beyond. I breathed it in, grateful for the freshness, though it did little to ease the tightness in my chest. Damien's stride was steady, unhurried, his silence unbroken. I wondered if he felt the same suffocation, if the weight of duty pressed upon him as it did upon me. Outside, the sky was pale, the sun hidden behind thin clouds. The courtyard stretched wide, its stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Guards stood at attention, their armor gleaming faintly. Servants lingered at the edges, their eyes lowered, their presence a reminder that, even here, we were watched. Damien released my arm once we had crossed the threshold. The absence of his touch was immediate, though it had been no comfort. I folded my hands once more, unsure of where to place them, unsure of where to place myself. He did not speak. Neither did I. The silence between us was vast, filled with all the words we would not say. We moved toward the inner corridors, the palace swallowing us again. The walls were high, the ceilings vaulted, the air cool and still. My footsteps were soft, barely audible against the stone, while his echoed with authority. I followed, though I did not know where he led. At last, he paused near a smaller chamber, a place where the light was dim, and the air smelled faintly of wax and parchment. He turned slightly, his back to me, his hand resting on the edge of the doorframe. I thought he might speak, but he did not. Instead, he stepped inside, leaving me at the threshold. I lingered, uncertain, my breath shallow. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. Then faintly, I heard his voice. It was the first time I had heard him speak outside the ceremony. The first time his words were not directed to the hall, but to himself. His tone was low, almost a whisper, as though he believed no one could hear. "This should never have been," he said. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. My heart clenched, though I had expected nothing less. Regret, reluctance, disbelief. They were all there, woven into the quiet confession. He had not meant for me to hear, yet I did. And in that moment, the distance between us felt insurmountable. I stood, frozen, the chill of the palace pressing against my skin, the weight of his words settling deep within me. The corridors seemed endless, each turn leading deeper into the palace's heart. My footsteps were light, careful, as though the stone beneath me might betray my presence if I pressed too firmly. Damien walked ahead, his stride measured, his silence unbroken. The distance between us was not only physical, it was a gulf carved by duty, by resentment, by the absence of choice. At last, we reached the quarters that were to be ours. The chamber doors opened with a faint groan, revealing a space vast enough to swallow me whole. The walls were draped with heavy tapestries, their colours muted in the candlelight. A fire burned low in the hearth, its glow casting shadows that danced across the floor. 2 beds stood apart, separated by a carved screen of dark wood. The arrangement was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the distance between us. My gaze lingered on the space, the emptiness between the beds, the way the screen seemed less a decoration than a barrier. I felt the sting of humiliation, though I had expected nothing else. Damien stepped inside, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the chamber without lingering. He did not look at me. His hand brushed against the edge of the screen, as though testing its solidity, before he moved toward the window. The curtains were drawn back, revealing the courtyard below, where the last traces of daylight clung to the stones. "This will be your side," he said, his voice low, formal. He gestured toward the bed nearest the hearth. I inclined my head, keeping my tone polite, steady. "Thank you." The words felt hollow, but they were all I had. I moved toward the bed, my fingers grazing the embroidered coverlet. The fabric was rich, heavy, far finer than anything I had known in my family's diminished halls. Yet it felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else. Damien remained near the window, his gaze fixed outward. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. I searched for words, for something to bridge the distance, but each thought dissolved before it reached my lips. At last, I said softly, "The chamber is generous." His shoulders shifted, though he did not turn. "It is sufficient." The exchange ended there, clipped and restrained. I folded my hands before me, my posture careful, my dignity a fragile shield. He avoided my eyes, and I did not press. When the summons for dinner came, we walked together once more, though the silence between us was heavier than before. The banquet hall was vast, its ceiling high, its walls lined with torches that flickered against the stone. A long table stretched across the room, meant for feasts and gatherings, yet tonight it held only 2 places, one at each end. Servants moved quietly, their eyes lowered, though I felt their curiosity in the way their gazes lingered when they thought themselves unseen. Whispers passed between them, faint as the rustle of fabric. I knew what they saw: a union without warmth, a bride who did not belong, a prince bound by duty. Damien walked to the far end of the table, his stride unhurried, his expression unreadable. I followed, my steps echoing softly. When I reached my place, I hesitated, unsure whether to sit without invitation. Before I could decide, he moved closer, his hand resting briefly on the back of the chair. He pulled it out, the gesture simple, unexpected. I looked up, startled, though I kept my expression composed. "Thank you," I murmured. He did not reply, but the faintest pause in his movements suggested acknowledgement. I sat, smoothing the folds of my gown, my heart unsettled by the small act of decency. The meal was laid before us: roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits arranged with precision. The distance between us across the table was vast, the silence louder than any conversation. I lifted my goblet, only to find it empty. Before I could reach for the pitcher, Damien's hand moved. He poured water into my cup, his movement steady, unremarkable, yet deliberate. I watched, uncertain, my breath caught in my chest. He set the pitcher down without comment, his gaze fixed on the table. The gesture was small, but it lingered, a faint crack in the wall of distance. We ate in silence, the clatter of cutlery the only sound. Servants moved along the edges of the hall, their whispers rising and falling like the hum of bees. I felt their eyes upon us, their curiosity sharp. I kept my posture straight, my movements precise, determined to show no weakness. Damien did not look at me. His gaze remained on his plate, his expression guarded. Yet the memory of his hand pulling out my chair, of the water poured into my cup, stayed with me, unsettling in its quiet humanity. The meal ended, and the servants withdrew, leaving the hall in silence once more. Damien rose, his movements deliberate, his face unreadable. I followed, my steps light, my heart heavy. We walked together back through the corridors, the torches casting long shadows across the stone. The silence pressed against me, suffocating. Yet I did not break it. My dignity demanded restraint. My fear demanded silence. At last, we reached the chamber once more. Damien paused near the door, his hand resting lightly against the frame. His gaze was lowered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't ask for this," he said. The words were soft, almost to himself. Yet I heard them. They hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. A confession of reluctance, of regret. My breath caught, my heart clenched. I stood frozen, the chill of the palace pressing against my skin, the weight of his words settling deep within me. The days that followed were filled with lessons, each one a reminder of how far I had fallen behind the expectations of this palace. From the moment dawn broke, I was summoned to chambers where advisors and noblewomen waited, their voices clipped, their eyes sharp. They corrected the way I held my goblet, the angle of my posture, the cadence of my speech. Every detail mattered, they said. Every gesture reflected upon the crown. I listened, obedient, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Though inside I felt the sting of humiliation. My family's disgrace had left me unprepared for this world, and they knew it. Their corrections were not gentle. They were reminders of my inadequacy. One morning, as I practiced the formal greeting expected of a princess, Lady Marwen, a noblewoman whose presence carried the weight of authority, watched me with narrowed eyes. Her gown shimmered with embroidery, finer than anything I had ever touched, and her voice was smooth, deliberate. "You carry yourself with politeness," she said, her tone deceptively kind. "But politeness is not refinement. It is clear you were not raised for this." The words struck like a blade, though she smiled as she spoke them. My cheeks burned, but I kept my expression composed, my voice steady. "I will learn." Her smile deepened, sharp at the edges. "One can learn manners, yes, but breeding cannot be taught." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I lowered my gaze, my heart pounding, shame pressing against my ribs. I had expected such words, yet hearing them aloud was different. They carried the weight of truth, or at least the truth as the court saw it. Before I could retreat further into silence, Damien's voice cut through the air, calm, quiet, but unmistakable. "Enough." Lady Marwen turned, startled, her smile faltering. Damien stood near the doorway, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, were steady, fixed upon her. "She is your princess," he said, his tone measured, deliberate. "You will treat her as such." The words were not loud, but they carried authority. The chamber fell silent, the advisers shifting uneasily. Lady Marwen inclined her head, her smile returning, though it was thinner now, brittle. "Of course, Your Highness." Damien did not linger. He turned and left, his stride unhurried, his silence resuming. Yet the echo of his words remained, heavy in the chamber, heavier still in my heart. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, confusion swirling within me. Why defend me? Why speak at all, when he had made it clear he did not ask for this union? His intervention was not warmth, not affection, but it was defense, undeniable and deliberate. The lessons continued, though the sting of Lady Marwen's words lingered. I carried them with me through the day, through the corridors, through the silence of our shared quarters. And when evening came, I found myself waiting, though I did not know for what. Damien entered the chamber quietly, his movements precise, his expression as guarded as ever. He removed his cloak, setting it aside, his gaze fixed on the fire that burnt low in the hearth. I watched him from my side of the room, my hands folded, my breath steady. At last, I spoke. "You defended me today." His posture shifted, though he did not turn. "It was necessary." I hesitated, my voice softer. "You did not have to." Now he turned, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in days. His gaze was steady, unreadable, yet there was something beneath it, something I could not name. "You are my wife," he said simply. "They will not speak of you that way." The words were not tender, not affectionate. They were honest, stripped of pretense. I felt the weight of them, the contradiction they carried. He had not asked for this marriage, yet he would defend it. Defend me. I lowered my gaze, my voice barely above a whisper. I do not understand you. His silence stretched, heavy, before he said, Nor do I. The honesty unsettled me, yet it was grounding. For the first time, his words felt human, not rehearsed, not bound by duty. I held them close, uncertain of what they meant, uncertain of what they might become. The fire crackled softly, the silence between us shifting, no longer suffocating, but fragile. I rose, moving toward the table where a book lay open, its pages illuminated by candlelight. I reached for it, intending to close it, when Damien stepped closer. His hand moved at the same moment, reaching for the same page. Our fingers brushed. The contact was accidental, fleeting. Yet it froze us both. His hand was warm, steady, mine trembling faintly. We did not move, did not speak. The silence deepened, charged, fragile. I lifted my gaze, meeting his eyes. For a moment, the distance between us felt less insurmountable, less certain. And then the moment broke, though neither of us moved. The palace had a way of binding us together, even when our hearts resisted. Every corridor, every hall, every gathering seemed designed to remind me that I was no longer Layla Hartwick, daughter of a disgraced house, but Princess Layla, bound to Damien Aldrich by decree. Yet the title felt hollow, a crown of thorns rather than gold. We were placed side by side at councils, our chairs aligned though our voices rarely joined. I sat with my hands folded, listening to advisors speak of taxes, treaties, and disputes, while Damien's silence carried more weight than their words. At ceremonies, I stood beside him, my gown brushing against his sleeve, though he never turned his gaze toward me. Even in the gardens, where I longed for solitude, attendants followed, ensuring that the prince and his bride were seen together. Proximity was demanded, intimacy denied. The tension grew with each passing day. We spoke little, our words clipped, polite, stripped of warmth. Yet silence was not emptiness. It was heavy, charged, filled with questions I dared not ask. His presence pressed against me like the cold stone walls of the palace, constant, immovable, unyielding. One evening, after a formal dinner where we sat at opposite ends of the long banquet table, I found myself unable to bear the silence any longer. The servants had withdrawn, leaving only the echo of our footsteps as we walked back through the corridors. Torches flickered along the walls, their flames bending under faint draughts, shadows stretching long across the stone. I stopped, my hand brushing against the wall for steadiness. My voice trembled, though I forced it steady. Why do you resent this marriage? The words slipped out, soft but sharp, carried by the weight of days unspoken. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. Damien paused, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought he would ignore me, continue walking, leave the question unanswered. But then he turned, his eyes meeting mine, his expression guarded yet unsettled. It was arranged, he said, his voice low, deliberate, forced, political. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. My breath caught, my heart clenched. I had known, of course, I had always known. Yet hearing it aloud was different. It was truth, stripped bare, spoken without pretense. Not personal, he added, his tone softer now, almost reluctant. I searched his face, trying to read the shadows in his eyes. His voice carried something I had not expected. Not cruelty, not disdain, but regret. Not of me, but of circumstance. I swallowed, my voice quiet. Then I am only a duty. His gaze did not falter, though his silence stretched. At last, he said, "You are not the cause of my resentment." The words unsettled me, their meaning uncertain. My chest tightened, confusion swirling within me. He had not asked for this union, yet he defended me before the court. He kept his distance, yet his tone now carried something fragile, something that hinted at sorrow. I lowered my gaze, my hands folded before me, my voice trembling. "I feel as though I am a burden." Damien's silence lingered, heavy, before he spoke again. "You are not." The honesty in his tone startled me. It was not warmth, not affection, but it was truth. I held it close, uncertain of what it meant, uncertain of what it might become. We stood in the corridor, the flicker of torches casting shadows across the stone. The silence pressed against us, fragile now, no longer suffocating, but uncertain. I thought of the noble's whispers, of Lady Marwen's cutting words, of the way the court looked at me as though I were an intruder. I thought of Damien's defense, quiet but firm, his voice carrying authority that silenced them. He had not asked for this marriage, yet he had stood for me. At last, I whispered, my voice barely audible, a truth I had never planned to share. I was never wanted, not even in my own house. The words slipped out, vulnerable, raw, carried by the silence. My breath caught, my heart clenched, as though speaking them aloud had torn something open within me. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Damien's eyes lingered on me, steady, unreadable. Yet something flickered beneath them, something I could not name. The palace had grown quieter in my mind, though its walls still loomed with the same immensity. Perhaps it was not the stone that had changed, but the silence between Damien and me. It no longer pressed with the same suffocating weight. It lingered instead, fragile, uncertain, as though waiting for something unnamed. Days passed with the same rituals, councils, ceremonies, lessons, but beneath them, a shift had begun. Damien's presence was still guarded, his words measured, but there were moments now, small and deliberate, where effort showed. He would pause to let me step through a doorway first, or slow his stride so mine did not falter. They were gestures so subtle they might have gone unnoticed, yet I noticed them, and each one unsettled me, not because they were grand, but because they were human. It was late one evening when the turning point came. The palace had quieted, the corridors emptied of attendants, the torches burning low. I had wandered into the garden, drawn by the faint scent of roses that lingered even in the cool night air. The moonlight spilled across the stone paths, silvering the leaves, softening the edges of the world. I stood among the roses, their petals pale in the dim light, my fingers brushing lightly against one bloom. Footsteps approached, steady, deliberate. I turned, startled, to see Damien. He was without his cloak, his posture less rigid than usual, though his expression remained guarded. For a moment, I thought he might pass without a word, but he stopped beside me, his gaze lingering on the roses. "They are tended carefully," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. I nodded, uncertain. "They are beautiful." Silence stretched, but it was not suffocating. The night air carried the faint rustle of leaves, the distant sound of water from the fountain. I kept my gaze lowered, my breath steady, waiting. At last, Damien spoke again, his tone softer than I had ever heard. "I do not know how to be a husband." The words startled me, though they were spoken with quiet honesty. I turned to him, my heart unsettled. His eyes met mine, steady, though there was something beneath them, something fragile, something uncertain. I was taught duty, he continued, his voice deliberate. Obligation, command, but not this. His hand gestured faintly toward the space between us, the roses, the silence. Not what it means to share a life. I swallowed, my voice trembling. Nor was I. His gaze lingered, searching, though he did not speak. The silence deepened, fragile, charged. I felt the weight of his words pressing against me, the honesty unsettling yet grounding. I want to try, he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. My breath caught, my chest tightened. For the first time, his words carried not only duty, but intent. Not obligation, but choice. I looked at him, truly looked, and for a moment, I saw not the prince, not the duty, but the man. His posture was still guarded, his expression still restrained, but his tone carried something human, something vulnerable. The roses swayed gently in the night air, their petals brushing against one another. I felt the fragility of the moment, the way it balanced between distance and closeness, between silence and confession. I do not know what it means to be wanted, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Damien's gaze did not falter. His silence stretched, heavy, before he said, "Then perhaps we will learn together." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. My heart clenched, confusion swirling within me. I had seen him as duty, as obligation, as distance. But now, in the quiet of the garden, I saw him as something else, as a person, uncertain, searching, willing. We stood together among the roses, the moonlight silvering the leaves, the silence fragile, but no longer suffocating. I felt the shift, subtle but undeniable, the way the distance between us had changed. At last, Damien's voice broke the silence once more, softer than before, almost to himself. "I wish you had been given a choice." The words struck deep, quietly devastating, carrying with them a longing I had not expected. My breath caught, my heart clenched, as though the truth of them had torn something open within me. The palace no longer felt like a cage, though its walls remained the same. Something had shifted between Damien and me, subtle but undeniable. Where once silence had pressed against us like stone, now it lingered with a gentler weight, no longer suffocating, but strangely safe. We moved through the days with less stiffness, our steps no longer forced into rigid alignment. At councils, he glanced toward me, not often, not long, but enough to remind me I was not invisible. At dinners, though the table remained long, he allowed the distance to shrink, his chair drawn closer, his presence less remote. Even in the corridors, where once he strode ahead without pause, he now slowed, his stride measured, as though aware of me beside him. It was not affection, not yet, but it was awareness, and awareness was enough to change the air between us. One evening, after the day's obligations had ended, I found myself on the balcony that overlooked the gardens. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses and damp stone. The moon hung low, silvering the courtyard below, casting shadows that stretched across the walls. I leaned against the railing, my fingers brushing the cold stone, my breath steady. Footsteps approached, deliberate, unhurried. I turned, and there he was. Damien stepped onto the balcony, his posture less rigid than usual, his expression unreadable, but softened by the moonlight. He did not speak at once, nor did I. The silence stretched, but it was not tense. It was quiet, fragile, safe. He stood closer than before, not accidentally, but intentionally. His presence was steady, his nearness deliberate. My heart tightened, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. I realized, in that moment, that I no longer feared him. What I feared was wanting him. The thought unsettled me, yet it lingered. Undeniable. We stood together, the night air brushing against us, the silence carrying more than words ever could. At last, Damien spoke, his voice low, deliberate. I have been told all my life what I must be, what I must do, but no one ever told me how to be this. I turned, my gaze meeting his. A husband, I whispered. He inclined his head, his eyes steady. Yes. The honesty in his tone unsettled me, yet it grounded me. He was not confessing weakness, but truth. And truth, spoken in the quiet of the night, carried more weight than any vow. I do not know what it means, he continued, his voice softer now, but I want to learn. My breath caught, my chest tightened. The words were simple, yet they carried intent. Not duty, not obligation, but choice. I lowered my gaze, my fingers brushing against the stone railing. I do not know either. His silence lingered, heavy but not suffocating. At last his hand moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached for mine, his movements careful, giving me room to pull away. I did not. His fingers brushed against mine, tentative, restrained, before settling lightly over my hand. The contact was fragile, hesitant, yet it carried more weight than any ceremony, any vow. My breath trembled, my heart racing, as though the world had shifted with that single touch. I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw not the prince, not the duty, but the man. His eyes lingered on mine, steady, searching, carrying something I had not expected. Something fragile, something human. The silence deepened, but it was safe now, no longer suffocating. It carried possibility, fragile but undeniable. At last, Damien's voice broke the quiet, softer than before, almost to himself. I never wanted a wife, until you. The words struck deep, quietly devastating, carrying with them a longing I had not expected. My breath caught, my heart clenched, as though the truth of them had torn something open within me. The night air pressed against us, the roses swaying faintly in the garden below, the moonlight silvering the stone. His hand remained over mine, steady, deliberate, undeniable. And for the first time, I did not feel unwanted. Thank you for listening. Another story will find you soon. With love, Claire